The laughter hit harder than any blow could have. It echoed off the walls, sharpened by the smug delight in every smirk around the room. The insult hadn't been clever, but it had been cruel, delivered by someone who knew exactly where to strike so it would draw blood in silence. All eyes had turned, waiting for a reaction, some sympathetic, most entertained. Yet the only thing visible on the protagonist's face was a faint, controlled smile, as though the words had missed their mark. Inside, though, the wound had already cut deep, leaving a scar that would demand repayment. That faint smile held while the storm gathered beneath it. Rage burned like oil kept beneath glass, invisible yet volatile. The humiliation replayed in memory, not as pain but as fuel. Every cruel word spoken aloud had been marked and catalogued. Each laugh from the crowd carefully remembered. The silence was not defeat. It was the sharpening of a blade in the dark. While the room moved on, while the antagonist basked in triumph, the protagonist had already begun calculating how the end would come. The antagonist reveled in the aftermath, as if victory were permanent. They strutted with the confidence of one who believed themselves untouchable, casting glances backward to ensure the wound they inflicted was still raw. They thrived on dominance, the kind that silenced others into submission. That smug reign felt absolute, untouchable, crowned by arrogance. The more they flaunted, the more certain they became that no one could challenge them. And so, when the protagonist remained silent, it only confirmed the illusion. Weakness, they assumed. Powerlessness. The absence of protest was mistaken for surrender. Whispers circled, "He'll take it. He always does. He's harmless." They all nodded along, blind to what simmered beneath the still surface. That stillness, however, was not weakness. It was patience. It was precision. From the very moment humiliation had been delivered, the seed had been planted. It did not wither, it grew. The hidden spark of vengeance took root, nourished by every smirk, every boast, every careless display of superiority from the antagonist. The outlines of a plan began forming quietly in the protagonist's mind. Each step would need time, each piece arranged so that when the trap closed, it would leave no escape. Revenge would not be messy. It would be flawless. That meant watching. That meant studying every movement the antagonist made, every flaw in their armor. The protagonist blended into the background, becoming a shadow in plain sight. No one noticed the intensity of those quiet eyes tracking patterns, cataloging alliances, and noting weaknesses. They learned when the antagonist lied, when they slipped, when they underestimated others. Silence became the weapon, each observation sharpening the coming strike. And still, the antagonist, blind in their arrogance, miscalculated. Each taunt, each boast, each careless show of dominance became another step into the snare. They had begun to believe in their own invincibility so completely that caution no longer restrained them. That was their fatal miscalculation. The trap was already coiled, and all it needed was for them to walk one step further into its waiting teeth. Then came the moment when silence no longer hid, when silence spoke louder than 1,000 words. The protagonist acted with precision, flipping the stage of humiliation onto its master. In front of the same eyes that had once laughed, the mask of the antagonist was stripped away. The careful unveiling timed so perfectly it looked effortless. Every falsehood was exposed, every cruelty reflected back like a mirror. The room that had once mocked now fell quiet, stunned by the sudden shift of power. And the downfall began. The antagonist, who once thrived on control, now scrambled to deny, to repair, to salvage what could not be saved. The facade cracked, and behind it was nothing but desperation. Lies unraveled faster than they could be mended. Strength turned to weakness, dominance to disgrace. The empire they thought unshakable crumbled in the span of moments, all under the weight of their own arrogance. When the dust settled, the silence that once seemed like surrender revealed itself for what it had always been: strength. The protagonist did not gloat, did not descend to cruelty, but stood renewed in quiet power. Revenge was not only achieved, it was perfected. In the stillness that followed, a new dawn rose. Success, composure, and control became the true victory. What once was humiliation had been transformed into triumph, and the final thought lingered like a warning to all who watched. Silence is not weakness. It is the beginning of power. The room fell silent, yet the echo of laughter lingered like acid in the air. Words meant to humiliate had found their mark, delivered with precise cruelty and witnessed by everyone who mattered. The protagonist stood in the center of it, dignity shattered, but expression calm, betraying none of the inner turmoil. Every insult, every mocking glance etched itself into memory, fueling a vow that would grow quietly, relentlessly. Revenge was no longer an idea. It had become a promise. Outwardly, the protagonist maintained composure, a mask of unaffected grace concealing the storm beneath. Every move of the antagonist was watched, every boast and smug smile catalogued. Suspicion took root, subtle at first, then sprawling into certainty. Nothing in the antagonist's success was accidental, and every step forward had likely come at the protagonist's expense. Patience became a weapon, the quiet waiting room for a storm that would arrive when least expected. Then came confirmation. Whispers, half-hidden comments, and carefully pieced together patterns revealed the antagonist's sabotage. Projects had been derailed deliberately, reputations subtly tarnished, and opportunities stolen under the guise of chance. Each discovery did not provoke outrage. It sharpened the protagonist's mind. Every lie uncovered strengthened the framework of a plan, a network of countermeasures designed to expose and punish with precision. To those around them, the protagonist appeared diminished, withdrawn, even harmless. Every glance seemed thoughtful, every nod submissive, every silence a concession. Yet invisibility was a strategy. Behind the facade, the protagonist tracked the antagonist's patterns, alliances, and habits, filing away weaknesses with surgical care. Every misstep the antagonist made, every overconfidence-driven error was noted. The more the antagonist flaunted their triumphs, the more the trap solidified, invisible yet inevitable. Arrogance blinded the antagonist. They celebrated every win, flaunted every success, and paraded their superiority as though the world itself had no choice but to bow. They failed to notice the careful arrangement of pieces around them, the quiet anticipation that would turn their confidence into a snare. Every laugh and boast became an invitation, and the protagonist read it all with calm precision, waiting for the exact moment to strike. The strike arrived not as chaos, but as inevitability. The protagonist unveiled the truth in a way that left no room for doubt, leveraging financial moves and strategic victories that silently dismantled the antagonist's reputation and influence. Every slight, every insult once aimed at the protagonist was now reflected back with unassailable authority. Humiliation flipped into dominance, and the audience that had once been a witness to derision now watched as power shifted decisively. The facade of the antagonist crumbled, and all lies unraveled. Allies recoiled, partners questioned, and the carefully constructed veneer of success shattered under the weight of truth. The same peers who had laughed now watched the collapse in stunned silence, unable to deny the meticulous strategy that had brought the antagonist low. Every attempt to salvage dignity failed, leaving nothing but the echo of arrogance punished by its own excess. And in the quiet that followed, the protagonist stood untouched, stronger and unassailable. Victory required no gloating, no petty retaliation, only the silent assertion of control earned through patience and intelligence. Silence, once mistaken for weakness, had been the quiet force that orchestrated the entire downfall. In that stillness, the protagonist rose, proving without words that strategy, resilience, and composure were the ultimate form of power, and that true triumph needed no audience to witness it. The laughter replayed in their mind, sharper than any insult could have been in the moment. Every mocking glance, every cutting remark, every whispered ridicule had been etched into memory with surgical precision. The humiliation that had once stung now served as a tool, honing focus into something unyielding. Where others might have been broken, the protagonist had transformed shame into fuel, letting it ignite a quiet but relentless determination. Every slight became a data point, every laugh a map to the weaknesses they would later exploit. Beneath a calm exterior, possibilities began to take shape. The office, the colleagues, the petty hierarchies. These were no longer prisons, but pieces on a board. Quietly, the protagonist explored opportunities outside the familiar confines, seeking avenues that could transform circumstance into leverage. Every conversation, every casual observation, became part of a larger plan. Each step measured to build strength while leaving the enemy unsuspecting. The path forward was neither obvious nor immediate, but it was tangible, and it began to illuminate with each careful choice. Memories returned like flashbacks, cruel and vivid. The antagonist's arrogance had never been subtle, mocking ambition, belittling appearance, trivializing financial struggles. Each moment once dismissed as social cruelty now crystallized as evidence of predictable hubris. The protagonist examined these past encounters with clarity, dissecting the patterns of disdain to understand both the enemy's strengths and weaknesses. Where humiliation had once felt personal, it now formed the blueprint of a strategy that would overturn every insult. From this understanding, action began in silence. Alliances were quietly formed, information carefully gathered, and knowledge acquired with discretion. The protagonist moved like a shadow, blending into networks and circles that the antagonist had ignored, underestimated, or overlooked entirely. Each connection strengthened the foundation of a plan that transformed past pain into real, actionable power. What had been mockery became opportunity. Every whispered joke converted into strategic advantage. Meanwhile, the antagonist thrived in ignorance, drunk on their own superiority. Wealth, influence, and confidence were flaunted like armor, blinding them to the slow but steady accumulation of power building just beyond their perception. They celebrated their dominance without suspicion, unaware that the very patience they dismissed as weakness was quietly eroding the ground beneath them. The arrogance that had once intimidated others now made them dangerously vulnerable. Time passed unnoticed, yet every moment brought the protagonist closer to readiness. Resources were quietly amassed, allies aligned, and skills sharpened with care. Patience was not idle. It was deliberate. While the antagonist basked in outward appearances of triumph, the protagonist built a foundation so strong and so precise that no sudden move would be needed. Only the moment of execution, perfectly timed, would reveal the empire that had been constructed in secrecy. Every insult, every sneer, every demeaning word had been stored and repurposed. Each had fueled the construction of influence, wealth, and authority in ways the antagonist could not have imagined. The protagonist's resolve was silent, unshakable, a force that grew stronger with each act of cruelty endured. Humiliation had become the mortar and brick of a rising empire, one that would not only match the antagonist's power, but eclipse it entirely. Unseen, unheard, the empire took shape. Success built quietly, strategy executed meticulously, while the antagonist remained oblivious. Every move the protagonist made was hidden in plain sight, a careful choreography designed to arrive at the perfect moment. The storm was brewing, its force invisible to the arrogant eye yet inevitable, and when it finally broke, it would sweep away the mockery and arrogance alike, leaving only the undeniable truth of silent, unstoppable strength. The antagonist's laughter filled the room, loud and unrestrained, echoing off walls lined with polished displays of their success. Every boast, every flash of wealth, every pointed insult hurled at the protagonist was calculated to humiliate. They mocked with confidence, certain their supremacy was untouchable, blind to the quiet storm brewing just beyond their notice. Each derisive remark only sharpened the protagonist's resolve, carving patience into precision, while the antagonist's ego continued to blind them to the consequences gathering like dark clouds on a distant horizon. Meanwhile, the protagonist's months of careful maneuvering were finally converging. Every alliance forged, every insight gained, every subtle move in the background began to coalesce into something tangible. The once silent underdog now had a strategy refined to near perfection, and the breakthrough they had long envisioned, a project, a venture, a demonstration of competence the antagonist had thought impossible, was within reach. Patience, strategy, and relentless observation had built a platform for a reversal no one yet suspected. Then came the misstep. A careless boast, a flippant remark in the wrong context, or a moment of public hubris betrayed the antagonist's overconfidence. Their carefully constructed image of untouchable authority cracked, and whispers of doubt began to circulate. Colleagues, clients, and allies who had once been captivated by charm now glimpsed flaws previously hidden. Credibility that had seemed impenetrable was suddenly vulnerable, and the protagonist had been waiting precisely for this fracture. Timing became everything. Every element of preparation aligned with opportunity, and the protagonist knew that the window to strike would be narrow but decisive. All the months of strategy, every quiet observation, every subtle preparation, converged in anticipation of the exact moment when the shift could occur. The protagonist's patience was rewarded by the perfect stage, where the culmination of silent work could finally manifest into visible, undeniable triumph. Even as the moment approached, tension hovered. Colleagues continued to underestimate the protagonist, and the antagonist, drunk on newfound confidence, gloated with reckless abandon. The underestimation sharpened the tension, each near miss, each dismissive glance a reminder of how close the reversal truly was. Every word, every movement, was observed and stored, heightening the suspense that lay like a taut wire, ready to snap in favor of the one who had waited with measured calm. Then the shift became palpable. A quiet, deliberate declaration, a subtle gesture, a statement of intent, a new revelation, signaled to all who had eyes to see that the protagonist had been quietly reshaping the battlefield. The spotlight, long dominated by arrogance, began its inevitable turn. The antagonist, still basking in assumed victory, was unaware of the change until it was already manifesting. The stage was set, the tension unbearable, and the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The air hummed with anticipation as the protagonist stood at the edge of a moment they had meticulously orchestrated. Every detail, every connection, every subtle maneuver of the past months had led to this instant. The stage was set not merely for recognition, but for vindication. Years of quiet endurance and careful planning converged as the protagonist prepared to step forward, not with anger, but with an unshakable presence that demanded acknowledgement. This was more than a reveal. It was a reckoning cloaked in elegance and precision, a testament to the power of patience. Each strategic move had been designed to land exactly where it would hurt the antagonist most. Features in industry magazines, invitations to prestigious seminars, viral mentions across networks, every appearance was carefully calculated to showcase achievements the antagonist had never anticipated. The protagonist was no longer a shadow. They were the focal point, commanding attention in spaces where the antagonist had long assumed dominance. Timing and precision merged seamlessly, creating a platform that highlighted the contrast between silent preparation and brash arrogance. When the antagonist finally witnessed the protagonist's ascent, the impact was immediate and undeniable. Confidence that had once seemed impenetrable faltered in an instant. Every smug smile, every dismissive gesture, every assumption of superiority was exposed as hollow. The carefully constructed facade of invincibility cracked under the weight of undeniable success, leaving the antagonist momentarily paralyzed, grasping at control that no longer existed. Peers who had once admired the antagonist now began to see the shift with clarity. Respect, curiosity, and admiration quietly transferred to the protagonist, whose measured rise revealed a depth of intelligence, resilience, and capability that had long been underestimated. Overnight, the balance of influence tilted, and the social currency the antagonist had relied upon evaporated before their eyes. Authority and admiration now flowed to the one who had endured and prepared in silence, while the former center of power reeled in shock. The protagonist observed it all without a word, allowing triumph to resonate without overt confrontation. There was no need for gloating or vengeance through dialogue. The success itself was a statement, louder and more enduring than any accusation or insult could ever be. Every glance of astonishment, every whispered acknowledgement of capability, reinforced the quiet satisfaction of a victory earned through patience, intelligence, and calculated resolve. And finally, a closing thought crystallized the entire journey. She mocked me for being broke. Now she had to watch me succeed in a way she could never touch. The words were unnecessary aloud. The truth was undeniable in every achievement, every accolade, every measure of influence the protagonist now commanded. Silence had never been surrender. It had been strategy, and the payoff was absolute, leaving a lasting imprint that no arrogance could ever erase. The moment the antagonist stumbled, The carefully cultivated illusion of superiority shattered. Colleagues who had once swallowed her every word now began to see the fractures in her persona, the subtle manipulations, the arrogance disguised as competence. Whispers replaced nods of agreement. Polite smiles gave way to questioning glances, and the once unassailable facade crumbled under the weight of its own deceit. Every calculated insult she had thrown, every belittling glance, now echoed back at her, undeniable to all who had been watching closely. What had been a throne built on intimidation and superficial charm revealed itself to be nothing more than a brittle mask, easily broken by the quiet patience of someone who had never underestimated the power of preparation. Meanwhile, the protagonist thrived in silence. There were no boasts, no confrontations, no public displays of triumph. Instead, each achievement, each advancement spoke volumes in its own right. Contracts signed, accolades received, recognition earned, all unfolded without a hint of vindictive spectacle, yet each success carried the subtle weight of a carefully executed plan. The antagonist's previous mockery and hubris had underestimated the protagonist entirely. The quiet diligence that had been dismissed as meekness now commanded respect effortlessly, a force as undeniable as gravity. Justice, poetic in its precision, revealed itself naturally. The antagonist, once so certain of her dominion, now faltered under scrutiny and exposure. Opportunities she had hoarded or manipulated slipped through her fingers, not through direct confrontation, but because her own arrogance had blinded her to the cracks forming around her. The very colleagues she had belittled, the social structures she had assumed to control, now witnessed her downfall with quiet astonishment, while the protagonist's steadiness, competence, and composure became a model of respect and admiration. Humiliation returned in the form of consequence, subtle yet irrefutable, perfectly aligned with the principle that arrogance, unchecked, carries its own undoing. Within the calm that followed, the protagonist reflected on the journey, savoring the precise orchestration of each step. Revenge had not been a storm of emotion. It had been a sequence of deliberate moves, each executed with clarity and patience. There was no need for verbal triumph or dramatic confrontation, for the satisfaction was in knowing that the plan had succeeded without compromise, that every insult and slight had been transformed into a silent force that propelled them to undeniable success. The power of patience and strategy revealed itself in full measure, a quiet strength that needed no validation from others. And finally, a closing thought crystallized the journey into truth. Revenge wasn't about shouting back. It was about building so high that her laughter could never reach me again. The words were not for anyone else. They were a private acknowledgement of endurance, intelligence, and resolve. The antagonist's fall was complete, and the protagonist's victory was absolute, a testament to the quiet power of strategy, patience, and unwavering focus, leaving a lasting impression that no mockery could ever diminish.